Hello, I'm Jack Grady, and on behalf of the Archives and History Committee of the First Baptist Church on the Square in LaGrange, Georgia, we welcome Korean War veteran Edward McCarthy, and we thank him for his service to our country and to our church. Ed, thank you so much for coming and being a part of this interesting project.
Thanks for inviting me, Jack.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Just want to chat with you a little bit about your World War II, your Korean War experience. You know, when you stop and think about it, my goodness, it's been like 63 years since the Korean War began. I think it was 1950, wasn't it?
Like that.
Along about that time. So, but as we think back, there's so many experiences that need to be shared, and I appreciate your willingness to share some of yours. Tell us a little bit, Ed, if you will, about your enlistment process. Were you drafted, or did you enlist right out of college, or before, maybe before college?
Well, Jack, I was in the 4-year Reserve Officer Training Program.
While you were in college?
Yeah.
Somewhat like ROTC?
ROTC.
Yes.
Each area kind of had their own programs, but ours was a 4-year program.
And this was in Minnesota?
University of
where you
Minnesota.
grew up, Minnesota?
And I went to the university there and participated in the program, and at the completion or near the completion of the program, for 2 summers, they would take you and send you to Fort Eustis, Virginia, for basic training.
Oh,
we had to go through the same basic training as a new recruit, only it was a group of officers rather than enlisted men, and I think the treatment was the same or everything else, but it was very, very strenuous, difficult, and one thing that I really disliked the most about it was a 14-mile hike with full pack and M1 rifles.
Carried your pack and your rifle with you on the 14-mile hike.
I decided after that I would never walk more than 1 mile at a time.
And this program was built into your college experience.
Right.
Yes, I see.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I was finished graduating, I was assigned to Fort Eustis, Virginia. Went out there and was assigned to be in training for amphibious truck operations.
Amphibious truck operations.
At that time, we called, I think we still do, call them ducks.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And we had them.
It's a vehicle that'll operate on land or water.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we were using a lot of these vehicles over in Korea, particularly during invasions. And one of the most recent ones at that time was the Incheon landing.
Incheon.
Incheon.
Yes.
And so we were having to train a lot of people to drive these vehicles. There was a lot of attrition. A lot of vehicles were shot up pretty bad in different invasions and that.
Mm.
So we had to cut a program that advanced these drivers and participants at a faster rate.
Yes.
As war was going on. But it was winding down about the time that we finished the training. And
So where were you assigned when you finished your basic training?
I was assigned then to Fort Story, Virginia, which was right by Virginia Beach. And there we had a Liberty ship. Some of your old-timers will remember what the Liberty ship was.
From World War II.
And
had a lot of those Liberty ships.
We had that anchored offshore about a mile. Mm-hmm. We trained these kids to drive the vehicles out to the Liberty ship, load up people or troops or cargo, and bring them back in.
Equipment of all kinds, I guess.
Yeah.
So they've transported them on these ducks,
Mm-hmm.
these vehicles that were geared for water purposes as well as land.
It was pretty tricky driving these vehicles because they're not like handling a car on the road or a truck. But I remember one experience that we had was we got about halfway out to the Liberty Ship and the winds changed. And they caught us. I had a very inexperienced driver at the wheel. They caught us and threw us up against the Liberty Ship, and we bounced around on that against that Liberty Ship for quite a while, and then, or it seemed like a long time. And finally, we had to pry this kid's hands loose, and I had to take over the wheel to get it away from the ship. We thought we would probably wreck it otherwise.
Wow, yes. Ed, explain to me, you were really an officer
Yes.
at that time. You were a college student in this special program, which was similar to ROTC, but you and your co-workers were officers.
Yes,
So the people that you were training, though, were enlisted personnel, I presume.
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that were training us to begin with were enlisted people too.
Oh,
So.
okay. So they
But
had
they were,
they had already been trained, I presume,
Yeah.
in what you were doing.
Right.
Sure. Had to be. Yeah. Good.
so it was,
Good.
but it was then after that period of training, and we trained those recruits. I was then assigned to go to Korea. I was on orders for Korea, and I flew out of Washington and got as far as San Francisco, and they pulled me off the plane and said, "You're being reassigned." And I said, "Thank you, Lord." But anyway, I was then assigned to the Presidio, which is in San Francisco.
Presidio, how long were you there?
I was there just about 6-8 months.
It's a very special kind of a base, isn't
It
it?
is.
I went through it just on a kind of a rush trip once when I was on the West Coast. But I remember going out to the Presidio because I had read about it. Tell a little bit about that.
Well, this was really a headquarters for the whole Pacific Command at that time.
Okay.
And in fact, when I reported into the commanding officer, he was a 4-star general, and he said, "I'm glad to see a second lieutenant. We haven't seen one of you guys for ages." And he said, "We have plenty of duties for you to perform here at the Presidio." But it was a major tactical, strategic command center. And in fact, all of the officers there were majors and above in rank.
Yeah.
So I got all them fun tasks.
Oh, I'm sure. Well, you learned a lot, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do. And so anyway, then they pulled me off that duty, and I was assigned to Oakland Army Terminal.
Oakland,
And
California.
Oakland Army Terminal at the time was a major processing center for the casualties coming back from
Oh,
the
my
Korean
goodness.
War.
Yeah.
And
That had to be a very difficult experience.
yeah, about the first or second week that I was there, we had this huge warehouse built there, and it was empty. And about 2 weeks after I was assigned there, a ship came in, and we received 5,000 bodies.
5,000
casualties.
casualties. Yeah, bodies.
It was,
Casualties usually refers to wounded as well as
yeah,
deceased, but
But
you're
these
talking
were
about
all
these are all deceased.
deceased.
Yeah.
And
Never forget that kind of an experience, do
Oh.
you?
you never get it out of your head.
Mm.
As you look at this huge warehouse and see all these caskets lined up, and you think that these men died for their country so far before their prime. They didn't have a chance to do what the Lord really wanted them to do, I thought, at the time.
Yes.
And I often wondered after that, what some of these people would have turned into.
Yes.
Would they become president? Would they become congressmen? Would become chief executive officers of huge companies? And
Yes.
where would they have had the most impact?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And it was, I still think about that every now and then.
Oh, I'm sure you do. Yeah, you can't lose those members at all. Well, it was a growing experience too for you, wasn't it?
Very much so.
Yeah. Growth experience about life and purposes and so forth. And also, of course, this was all about serving your country and doing your duty as a soldier. And you were pleased, I'm sure, to be able to do that, but still in all it was challenging, especially in situations like this. 5,000 casualties on one ship.
Yeah, I think they came off one ship. I might have. There were a couple of boats, ships that came in about the same time. But
I'm glad you changed that right quick to ships.
yeah,
Some people mistakenly say a boat when it's a ship. It's a ship. I can't help saying that because I was in the Navy.
Yeah.
Well, Ed, I see Jillian chuckling back there. Okay. What would you say was your most memorable experience? It could have been what you just told us, but I'm sure you had other memorable experiences that you'd like to share.
Well, I think we had so many experiences that it's hard to come up with one or two, but definitely the assignment there at the Oakland Army Terminal was very memorable, not from a good standpoint, but it gave me a real sense of God being in control, and no matter what happens, He's the one that's going to lead us through it.
Yes.
And of course, the other one was that experience with that young soldier driving that duck out to the Liberty ship.
Oh, yes. Froze at the wheel.
And thinking, how am I going to get out of this one?
Yes. But you did.
But we did.
Yes. Well, what would you say about some experiences you had that were specifically, I guess you could say, preparation for life, things that were going to come later? What did you experience that you found to be helpful in later life? Maybe some of them you were not even conscious of at the time, but you're looking back on, you were reflecting on that. Things that you did, that you were asked to do, that helped prepare you for your future life.
Well, I think one important lesson that I got early on was a leadership lesson, and that was that in order to lead people, you've got to not just know the basic fundamentals, you've got to go and find out what your audience is, what it consists of, what their needs are, and try to meet those needs in order to lead them in different situations. And I learned that fast when I received these new recruits, and started them out on basic driving techniques and basic marksmanship. And if you didn't understand where they were coming from, you could probably get off on the wrong foot with them, because some of them just didn't know it, had never experienced driving a truck or shooting a rifle.
They were what I guess
So-
people call raw recruits.
Raw recruits is right.
Yeah.
And so that taught me a good lesson right there for leadership later on, because we have to know our audience,
Yes.
number one.
Yes.
And of course, the experience there at the Oakland Armored Terminal was frightening, and yet it gave you a greater sense of responsibility for your own life.
Mm-hmm.
As, I think everybody that's been in the service thinks, well, it could have been me over
Yes.
there in one of those caskets coming back,
Oh.
one of the wars.
Couldn't help but think of it like that. Yeah. Well, I appreciate your reflections and your willingness to share that, because I think it's important that we hear that and we understand what went on during that period of time. And you ended up, after the Korean War, going into in the corporate world, I know. And then later on, you went into a specialized ministry program. You want to touch on that Bible League that you served so well?
Well, I was, in fact, we were living down here in LaGrange, Georgia. That was about 35 years ago. And we had come down here. I was a marketing consultant at the time, and I was assigned to help Whiting Trackmobile move from Harvey, Illinois down here.
Trackmobile.
Trackmobile.
Yeah.
And they're
Okay.
now part of Wheelabrator or Fry.
Oh, yes.
And so anyway, we were here, and then my assignment with them ended, and I had received a call from a friend of mine that I'd known years past, and he wanted me to come back to Chicago to go with a ministry there called Slavic Gospel Association. And this was a ministry to the Slavic people, particularly in Russia and East Europe. And I learned right then and there, never question the Lord, because I said, I don't want to move back to Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
We loved LaGrange. But anyway, we make a long story short, we moved back to Chicago and went with the Slavic Gospel, and the Russian evangelist that was in charge and was president of that mission, one of the first days I went in there, he said, Ed, he said, your assignment is to raise $15 million.
Wow. What a
And I
challenge.
said, thank you, sir. I think I left the wrong place. But anyway, he had a vision, and this was back in 1988, 87.
Just before Russia opened up
Right.
again to the
He had a
gospel.
vision, and his vision was that within 5 years, he was going to have enough theological educational material to put into about 15 Bible colleges in Russia.
Oh, 15 colleges in
And
Russia.
up to that time, we couldn't even get a Bible into Russia,
Yes.
except in a suitcase or things like that. So I accepted his challenge, and I said, Lord, we need to do this. If you want it done, show us how. and we were able to do it in 3 years.
15
We had enough
million.
material, and sure enough, in '88, it opened up.
Wow.
And that led another experience that I had was to go into Russia. I was the second American to go into the city of Gorky, which had been an army center, and foreigners had never been allowed in there. And I met with a Baptist church there that had been underground for 70 years.
When you say underground, now, of course, I understand what you're saying, but maybe explain that.
Well, during the 70 years of Stalin and all the repression that was going on in
They didn't allow the
didn't
Bible
allow
in.
open worship services or religion
So
services of any kind.
If you wanted to go to church, you had to hide.
You
hide
did it
somewhere.
in a farmhouse, in a barn, wherever you can find it. The
Fascinating.
authorities would not, and you had to keep moving too, because they would not. They would eventually track you down and close the church. But I had a wonderful experience there. I hand carried cases of Bibles in, and most of those were signed, and I gave them out as I went through the different cities of Moscow and other areas there. But I had one case left, and I had 6 cases. Excuse me. I had 6 cases of Bibles left that I didn't know where I would want to put those. And I got to this small church there in Nizhny Novgorod. Never could pronounce those Russian names. But I met the pastor, and I gave him the 6 cases of Bibles, and he said, we have been praying, and we had a vision about 3 or 4 years prior to that the Lord was going to send us 6 cases of gold.
6 cases of gold.
And he said, here, you bring 6 cases of Bibles.
He had a vision of your arrival with those 6 cases.
And I still shudder when I think about
I'm
that.
sure.
It's so unbelievable.
Fascinating experience, I know. Well, thank you for sharing that. And then you came back to LaGrange later and got involved in the ministry of our church. You lead a very, very significant ministry. Tell us a little bit about the soup kitchen, just in a
Well, the soup
fair
kitchen
brief.
really started with Red Hobson years back, and Jim Lee
Yes.
took it over, and then I didn't realize at the time Jim was preparing me to take over.
Yes.
But back in those days, we were serving about 100. I think our highest attendance at any time was about 118 people.
People who
And-
would come to our church for a meal.
Right.
Okay.
And they had to be cleared with the Personal Aid Society that they were of needy character.
Okay.
And
This was one day a week.
yeah, there's 3 churches: our church, Presbyterian Church, and the First Methodist. All
Okay.
have a day a week. In fact, I think the First Methodist has 2 days, but they serve sandwiches one day.
I see.
But these are hot meals that we serve to these people, and for a long time there we were averaging around 100. But most recently we've dropped way off, and we're not sure just what the cause is. But last week we only had about 56 people.
So you think some
but
of
they're
them
very-
were employed, or
Some of them have part-time employment. Others are homeless and did not have any
yes?
means of support. it's a very gratifying ministry.
You have to be prepared for whoever shows up, I guess, or how many show up.
That's right.
And that's a tough
We
assignment.
can have
when
40
you
or we can have 100.
but you're prepared to do whatever it calls for.
And Jim has to prepare the food, so I keep telling him, now don't short us.
Yeah.
But it's difficult to know just how many are
They
going
don't
to
make
be there.
reservations, do they?
They don't make
They
reservations.
just show up.
But it's good ministry. I'm glad to do it, and we have a lot of help, a lot of other volunteers,
Good. How many?
including those who do the
Perhaps
Meals on Wheels.
on a given day that you serve the hot meal, how many helpers do you have?
Well, I try to have 7.
7.
That's a perfect complement, but it doesn't always work out that way. But we try to have 6 or 7 people
I
there
see. Yeah, good.
to serve and clean.
Well, we appreciate what you do, Ed. It's a very significant ministry.
Yeah.
And this church, I know, really appreciates the people in this church who know about this, at least appreciate it. And I thank you for sharing a bit about that.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that you also are a Sunday school teacher. So you've been a very positive influence for this church and people in this church. And again, we want to thank you not only for your service to our country during the Korean wartime, but we thank you for your continuing heart for ministry and your service right here in this church. It's been good to visit with Ed.
Thank you, Jack.
Anything else you want to add?
No, I'm just very thankful we live in a city like LaGrange,
Yeah.
Georgia, and that we are members of the First Baptist Church on the Square.
Good.
And we love it here, and we hope to spend the rest of our years here.
Great. And we wish you well.
Thank
You
you.
and your wife, Georgina. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Best wishes.